Hi everyone, I'm Chyill and welcome back to another Battlerite discussion video. Today we'll be discussing the patch 1.5.2, which I believe it's the main patch for the Battlerite Pro League, so there are a lot of balance changes, a couple of new things in terms of cosmetics, and yeah, just a lot of changes basically. So just to get it out of the way first, I know I haven't been posting a lot in the past week ever since I come back from traveling, but that's mostly because I've been quite busy with IRL stuff. So yeah, I hope you guys understand and bear with me as I am working on the Ulric guide. And luckily, I mean, we didn't put out the Ulric guide too early because Ulric has been massively changed. Well, I wouldn't say massively, but he has been changed quite a bit in this patch. So yeah, let's just get started. So first of all, some general updates. Creepy chests and all that are no more. Now they have the Pro League chests, and these will be available through the Twitch commerce. Basically, you can buy it through Twitch. Say you go to a Battlerite stream, at the bottom, I think that's where you buy it from. I think each chest will be about $4.99 if I'm not mistaken, and yeah. Every time you buy one of these chests, you also gain one of those Twitch chests, which you can get the cloud mount and emotes and all that sort of stuff. And these Pro League items, if you want to look at how they look like, if you haven't looked at it already, there's a link to the YouTube video showcasing these items down in the description below or the comment section below, so you can go ahead and check it out there. But basically, Jade, Rook, Shifu, and Sirius all have got new legendary outfits, weapons, and poses basically. Yeah, so if you guys would like to get these items, you guys can only actually buy it through Twitch. You can't actually buy them using tokens, so if you've saved up many tokens, you actually can't buy it. So yeah, just letting you guys know about these Pro League chests, which is probably something that SLS is doing together with Twitch, I suppose. So yeah, that's about it on the cosmetic stuff. So now let's move on to the main part of this video, which is the champion updates. And first of all, Alysia, massive buffs, at least to me. Her cooldown has been reduced for her Q, EXQ, E, and EXE. And then her Ice Crown now inflicts 1.75 seconds chill on impact and another 1.75 seconds chill when destroyed. And her chill debuff has a max snare factor of 30%. And yeah, and in terms of Battlerites, her figure skating Battlerite, that is the right, which gives her the haste when she uses a Q. It also gives the EXQ, the haste now at the end of it instead of when it is applied. So you get the little haste after you get out of the ice block basically. And so SLS says that Alysia is still pretty poor in terms of her performance, and so they gave her a little bit of buffs to hopefully let her be able to contest and fight a little bit more aggressively without having to worry too much. And so that's why they reduced the cooldowns of her Q and E abilities, which are basically her utility abilities, I suppose. Q being a shield and movement speed buff, and E being her freeze and area denial and all that sort of stuff. So pretty interesting. Definitely I'll be playing a little bit more Alysia, I believe, because of these changes. I think it definitely makes her a little bit more fun to play, I guess, because you can do a lot more and instead of just constantly running away basically. Not to mention actually the EXQ had its shield health increase from 40 to 50 as well. So yeah, pretty nice to see. Moving on to Bako. Bako has just a little bit of minor changes to one of his Battlerites. His Axe and Shield Battlerite cooldown reduction reduced from 1 second to 0.5 seconds, so nothing really that much. On to Blossom. Blossom has been buffed a little bit, mostly because I think currently in a lot of pro teams, they mostly pick like Zander, Ulric, this sort of heroes, and so Blossom and a couple of other support champions aren't exactly picked that often, and so I think that's why they're giving her a little bit of a buff basically. So her Tree of Life, that is a Q, the health has been increased from 24 to 30 because they feel like it's pretty squishy, a strong mouse to attack would just take it out immediately, and so yeah, they don't want that to happen, and so Blossom's Tree of Life health has been increased. The E cooldown has been reduced a little bit, probably to make her just a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, because right now a lot of supports, like by that I mean like supports picked in pro teams, seems to be Zander and Ulric, which offer quite a lot of aggression basically, and so perhaps that might be why they changed the E ability this way. Not only that, her Battlerites has been I think mostly buffed. Fluttering Grace, the haste factor per buff increased from 10% to 12%. I believe this is the one which lets her move faster. Kind-Hearted, the butterfly bonus healing increased from 2 to 4, which is pretty cool. A bit of extra healing. Nature's Presence, bonus damage and healing factor increased from 15% to 20%. Refreshing Seed, haste percentage increased from 35% to 40%. Poland, bonus stun duration increased from 0.4 seconds to 0.6 seconds. So there's basically lots of buffs to a lot of her support and utility kind of Battlerites, you know. And even Puff as well, knockback distance increase and duration increase as well. So yeah, just making Blossom a little bit more favorable, I guess, in 3s, because Blossom is typically more stronger in 2s, so I'm guessing like they're giving her a little bit more of a numbers boost, perhaps for 3s, I'm guessing. So yeah, on to Destiny. So Destiny, they say that she has been falling a little bit out of favor, and so they just give her a little bit of a buff, which is reducing the cooldown of a Q, which I think is pretty huge. Well, I wouldn't say it's pretty huge, but it's a big deal because that means that she has a counter available more often, and that is, if you know, one of her sort of iframes, her main iframes, without any Battlerites. So yeah, it's pretty important, and I think they're also making it so that all counters are now 8 seconds, because later on down, further changes to other champions, you'll see that a lot of the Q abilities, which involves like sort of a counter mechanic, has been the cooldown has been changed to 8 seconds basically. So on to Ezmo. They say that Ezmo has been one of the more prominent range champions, and so they are sort of toning him down a little bit. So they wanted to maintain his burst potential but tone down his overall damage, and so his mouse 1 reload duration has been increased from 0.9 seconds to 1 second. So this means that when he's fully reloaded, fully ready to attack, his burst potential is still there, but it takes a little bit longer for him to reload, and that means that his overall damage will go down, So they also said that his AWP control is too strong with his ultimate, and so they're toning down his ultimate damage from 55 to 50. So I would say just a little bit of a minor nerf to Ezmo. I don't think it's gonna change Ezmo much, because the reason why he's picked is more for the control and the utility and a little bit of the burst damage, and so it's not really about the overall damage anyways because of his lack of range. So yeah, I don't think Ezmo is really impacted that much, but I believe that Ezmo is in a pretty balanced spot anyways. So yeah, on to some of Ezmo's Battlerites. Whiz fading haste factor reduced from 60% to 50%, and undermine weaken factor reduced from 50% to 40%. So not too major, mostly just quite minor in my opinion. So yeah, so on to Freya. Freya has always been the sort of the really strong pick against other melee champions, and so they're sort of toning down Freya's ability to deal melee damage, whereas they'll buff her a little bit in terms of her range damage, so that she's not completely useless when she actually gets in range, or she can actually deal a little bit more poke damage basically. So what happens is that her mouse 1 damage has been changed from 10-10-16 to 10-10-14, so just a bit of a minor nerf to her mouse 1 damage, at least the third hit at least. And her mouse 2 damage has been increased from 10 to 12, and the haste factor from her spacebar and EX space has been reduced slightly from 100% to 90%. So just make her a little bit less chasey, I guess, as well with this change here. Onto her Battlerites, mostly the melee related ones, or like shield related ones, have been nerfed a little bit, and the range damage one has been buffed a little bit. So Tempest haste duration reduced from 2 seconds to 1.75 seconds, and haste factor reduced from 35% to 30%. So like I mentioned, just reduce a little bit of chasing capabilities. Thunderbolt bonus damage increased from 8 to 12, which is pretty significant, I think. Onto Electric Conduction, shield health reduced from 14 to 12. So yeah, as I mentioned, shield health. Lightning Rod as well, shield health reduced from 10 to 8. Thundering Spring bonus duration reduced from 1 second to 0.75 seconds. Like I said, reduced chasing ability, I guess. Rolling Thunder as well, max range reduced. And Hammer Time cooldown reduction increased from 4 seconds to 5 seconds. Once again, another sort of more for her range ability basically. So yeah, overall I think Freya, I think these changes for Freya are quite fair. I wouldn't say they are fully warranted, I guess, but I think maybe they feel like depending on they're sort of balancing depending on the tournament meta, I guess, like, you know, what champions are being picked more, what champions are, you know, very oppressive in a tournament setting. So they're sort of balancing around that, which I guess makes sense because the Battlerite Pro League is currently underway, and so these changes are probably for the Battlerite Pro League. And I highly doubt that we will see any other major changes to a lot of champions until the Pro League is over, because that would just mess up with a lot of things. So yeah, these changes will last for quite a while, probably at least until the Battlerite Pro League is over, I believe. So yeah, on to Jade. Jade's another one that got a little bit of a nerf as well. Her range got nerfed slightly for a mouse one, you know, from 7.6 to 7.4, because they felt that Jade was too hard to punish, basically, and so they wanted to make her slightly less safe when she engages with her enemies. So yeah, moving on, her space damage has been reduced from 12 to 8, and the EXQ, the haste duration, has been reduced from 0.9 seconds to 0.8 seconds, and the fading haste factor reduced from 100% to 90%. So I think for the EXQ, really, there's the changes are quite minor. The big ones is really the mouse one and the space change. So clearly she's not going to be able to do as much damage overall without sacrificing her safety. So that's pretty cool. For those who hate dealing with Jade, I think this is quite some nice changes to see, I think, especially on the mouse one and the spacebar change for melees. Onto a Battlerite's Gunslinger cooldown reduction per hit reduced from 0.3 seconds to 0.25 seconds, so making her, this basically just means that her EXQ is going to be up less often. Deadly Focus bonus damage reduced from 6 to 5, and Delight initial healing reduced from 6 to 5, and on interrupt healing reduced from 10 to 8. So I think Deadly Focus is quite fair that they reduce the damage slightly. I think Deadly Focus is really, really strong, especially if you pair it up with her EX Mouse 2, because it's almost instant. And yeah, just basically toning down a little bit of her offensive capabilities, I suppose. And of course, Delight is a bit of nerf to her survivability as well. You know, they want to give her a little bit of weakness and not just be so strong overall, basically. So yeah, pretty cool. On to Jamila. Jamila has got some quality of life changes, not so much on like a direct buff or nerf kind of thing, but just making her a little bit more like easier to use, or like how to say, less punishing, I suppose. So yeah, EX Mouse 2 cooldown reduced from 7 seconds to 6 seconds, and the projectile speed increased from 22 to 28, so just a minor buff. Her Phantom Strike, or her EX Space ability, now ignores postcast and global cooldown. Her E as well ignores global cooldown. And Stalking Phantom, her ultimate ability, cast time reduced from 0.7 seconds to 0.5 seconds, which is a welcome buff, honestly, but I think the ult is still a little bit too weak to be really that useful. I mean, compared to her other EX abilities, like her other abilities that uses energy, like her R, shift space, and her shift right click. So yeah, welcome one. They probably have to buff it up a little more for it to be useful, in my opinion, but at least they're slowly moving toward that direction. For Poloma, they change it so that they help out her self-healing a little bit more, and just buff up some of the lesser pick Battlerites. So for EXQ, this is, I think, the biggest change in this patch, is that the damage has been reduced from 15 to 10, so it's less deadly, but the healing has been increased from 15 to 20. Now, personally, I really like to use the EXQ for damage as a Poloma main, but I guess the self-heal is kind of nice as well. And I think this means that actually taking the right for the mouse 2, I believe it's called, it's the green color mouse 2 one, which reduces the cooldown of a mouse 2 and making it heal more. That might not be as necessary, especially against a lot of other melee champions, because of this increased self-healing. At least that's in my opinion. But probably I'll still pick that Battlerite anyways. Onto Pixie, the cooldown has been reduced from 20 seconds to 15 seconds. So now this is also kind of in line with most other champions, you know, R ability, which has a cooldown of 15 seconds. This makes her, like, you know, they just want to give her a little bit more options, basically, to deal either more damage or more healing. And yeah, just because 20 seconds is quite long, and you know, that means that her R isn't gonna be able to be up as often, so making it 15 seconds is it's a nice change. I think it's a pretty big buff, in my opinion. Then again, it's also kind of just okay because you don't always get to use the value of the R that much, except maybe when you're taking the R, or there's like a window of opportunity to deal massive damage to a single target. So on to the Battlerite's Shimmering Bond, the healing shared bonus increased from 70% to 80%, and Direwolf root duration increased from 1 second to 1.2 seconds. So just a bit of buffs to her lesser picked Battlerites. This definitely does make Direwolf slightly more appealing, but I think it's still not as good as the increased damage and range I think that you get from Silver Fang. So on to Raigon. Once again, the Q cooldown reduced from 9 seconds to 8 seconds to make it more in line with other counters. Basically, the counter attack damage has been increased from 12 to 14, and for his R ability, the damage has been increased from 8 to 10, and wall impact damage increased from 10 to 12. So they're sort of giving Raigon a little bit more ways to deal some real damage, basically. So this means that his R, if you actually use his R properly and hit against a wall, that's 4 extra damage. And if you have the Dragon Mastery Battle, that's 8 extra damage, which is, I think, pretty significant. So yeah, on to Battlerites. Aerial Strike, just a small bug that they fixed, so that's nothing much. So finally, a little bit of love to Raigon, you know, a bit of buff to his damage output, which I think it's quite welcome. The time for Raigon to actually be able to stay in among the opponents and like deal damage is usually quite small. Like, you know, he's not actually very able to like stay amongst the enemies like Shifu or, you know, Freya, Rook, for example, because the way he works is that he has to deal damage and then heal up from his attacks, and so he's not as survivable. And so having more real damage options is quite welcome, so that he can just sort of quickly go in, do some damage and get out, you know, something like that. So yeah, on to Rook. They're sort of reducing his capabilities to do a lot of his wall combos, but overall it's a buff, I would say, to Rook in general. Actually a pretty big buff, because his mouse 2 cooldown has been reduced from 8 seconds to 7 seconds, and the damage has been increased from 16 to 20. So this makes him a lot more punishing, you know. He can deal a lot more mouse 2s. He's a bit more his iframe is basically ready more often, and he can deal a bit more damage with it. His EX mouse 2 cooldown reduced from 8 seconds to 7 seconds. This is probably just to make it the same as the mouse 2. The space damage has been increased a little bit, but to compensate for that, his R damage has been reduced from 12 to 6, which is a pretty big deal. But I think the change to the mouse 2 probably sort of outweigh the nerfs to the R, in my opinion. So yeah, I think pretty welcome change, honestly. Like sometimes Rook, if you space in, you use your counter and you whiff it, you use your mouse 2, you are pretty much a sitting duck unless you have energy to heal up. So I think this is a nice change in my opinion, and quite fair, considering that Rook can be a little bit hard to play at higher ranks, and quite easily punished in my opinion. On to Rukhan. Rukhan's got a bit of help for his E and EXE abilities. That's mostly it really. The damage and healing has been increased for his E, and his EXE now also heals himself for 8 when pulling an ally. So yeah, because before this, if you use a shift E, you actually don't get any healing for yourself, as compared to, like, you know, if you use E on an enemy. So this, I guess, encourages you to use your EXE a little bit on your ally if possible, which is quite nice to see. Just a little bit of a utility buff, I guess, and a slight damage buff, honestly. Nothing too major, because I think Rukhan is in a pretty okay spot in my opinion as well. Onto his Battlerites. For Hunger, knockback distance increased from 2 to 2.5, so really nothing major in my opinion. Onto Shifu. Shifu's got a tiny nerf in my opinion. Thrust bonus damage per charge has been removed. Base damage bonus increased from 2 to 3. So on one hand, it's a buff if you use it a lot without any charges, but on the other hand, it's also a nerf. So I think I mean, of course, overall it is a nerf, because the overall damage has been reduced. But yeah, I think they're just sort of making Shifu a little less dangerous, I guess. Swift Feet bonus duration reduced from 1 second to 0.7 second, and bonus haste factor reduced from 15% to 10%, which I think it's quite a big deal, honestly. This, especially the bonus duration reduction, considering that Swift Feet is quite I won't say important, but it's really quite useful in keeping up with enemies, considering how short Shifu's attack range is. So yeah, I think it's a pretty this Battlerite change from Swift Feet I think is more significant than the thrust one in my opinion. But I don't play a lot of Shifu, so I don't really know for sure. But yeah, hopefully this makes Shifu a little less dominant in the solo queue and all that because of these changes. But we have to see. On to Thorn. Thorn still has his place in coordinated tournament play, but he struggled a little bit in general matchmaking. So SLS basically just buff a little bit of his range pokes and to rights. So SLS decided to just, buff his range pokes a little bit and also to rights with lower pick rates. So for his EX mouse 2, the damage has been increased from 10 to 12. So that actually means that his EX mouse 2 can deal 48 damage now instead of 40, which is quite a big buff to the EX mouse 2, which should probably help his general matchmaking a little bit, because I don't think people use the EX mouse 2 all that much. His Thorn's buff, the damage has been increased from 4 to 6 and healing increased from 8 to 12. So I think this is more major than the Thorn Barrage, because this buff, I think as far as I know, there is a Battlerite that basically improves the Thorn's damage and all that. So this Thorn buff is, I think, pretty major, because you'll be applying the Thorn's buff like almost the entire game, right? And so you're going to get more damage from it, you're going to get more healing from it, and it should help out Thorn quite a bit, I think. Onto his Battlerite's Grounding Grass, the root duration has been increased from 1 second to 1.5 seconds, which I think is quite huge. And Sinister Sap damage increased from 8 to 12, and this is a pretty big buff to his range poke, I believe. So yeah. In general, nice stuff, because I feel like Thorn, he was nerfed in the past few patches, so I guess it is quite welcome to see that they are buffing him just slightly in terms of his range poke. And so yeah, because a lot of times Thorn, when you're just sort of standing around, there's not a lot that you can do, especially from afar, other than your mouse 2. So yeah, it's nice to see. On to Ulric. Ulric has got quite a lot of nerfs actually, in fact even to his max HP, and the reason for this is because of the a lot of comms that has been enabled by Ulric in the tournament. I think they're sort of trying to balance out the support champions so that more support champions are being played and all that. And so Ulric, his max HP has been reduced from 240 to 230 to make him a little bit less tanky. His mouse 1, the visual effect of Charge Hammer has been made more noticeable, so that, perhaps it's clearer when he's actually using his charge attack, because sometimes it may not be as clear. For his spacebar and EX spacebar, the healing has been reduced from 12 to 9, so just a bit of a nerf to his healing. And the post wait time, that is the time before you can act after the dash, has been increased a little bit from 0.1 second to 0.15 seconds. So basically just a little bit of a nerf to just making him a little bit more sluggish, basically, because you have to wait a little bit longer after you cast your spacebar or EX spacebar to do something. And the next one I think is a pretty big nerf as well, which is his favor. The bonus healing factor has been reduced from 20% to 15%, which is quite a big deal, because like his charges actually recharge quite slowly, right? And so it takes quite a while to actually heal, and so he needs this favor buff to do some like decent heals. Not that his healing right now after the nerf would be bad, but it's sort of there will be a noticeable impact, I believe, because of this nerf. On to Battlerites. Cleave no longer deals bonus area damage. I believe that's the 2 extra damage that you deal to everything. Devotion now grants 3 bonus healing while healing allies. So I think this means that you don't need to have favor onto allies anymore, which is quite nice, I would say, because then now you can just get the 3 bonus healing all the time without needing to wait until you get favor. Divine Protection has been nerfed massively. Applying favor on an ally grants them a shield, and it absorbs up to 12 damage for 1.5 seconds. So it no longer gives the 10% damage reduction, because it used to give 10% damage reduction while favor is on an ally for 5.5 seconds, which is a pretty big deal. But now it only makes a shield for 1.5 seconds. So to make use of this, you kind of have to space to an ally perhaps just before the damage lands, because it only lasts for 1.5 seconds, which I think can be quite hard to do quite often. So I don't think it's that useful anymore, Divine Protection. On to Penitence. Incoming healing reduction reduced from 33% to 25%. I think this one is quite fair because 33% healing reduction is quite huge, and so 25% is a little bit more fair, and it's more in line with other support champions. Like, you know, a lot of other support champions have the Battlerite to reduce the healing of enemies as well. So I think this is quite fair. And finally, Vindicator, also another fair one, now reduces the cooldown of Intervene by 4 seconds instead of a full cooldown reset. So yeah, he's not as able to just you know, space in recklessly, use his R and then space out with this, because it has only a 4-second cooldown reduction, which I think also it's quite fair. Honestly, I think the biggest impact to Ulric from these changes are probably his healing reduction from his spacebar and favor, and probably the divine protection Battlerite as well. But other than that, at least his playstyle is still maintained, and I think in terms of his healing when favor is still up, together with devotion, it should still be quite okay, I think. So yeah, on to Zander. Zander as well has been nerfed quite heavily actually because of his pick rate. I think the healing reduction to Spotlight is pretty huge for one, and the other thing as well is that the portal, the minimum sort of travel duration, basically the time where it shows where to your enemies where you're gonna land, has been increased, so it gives people a little bit more time to react to where you're landing. Okay. Also, the maximum cast range for Portal has been reduced from 10 to 8, and this means that Zander's allies cannot go as deep before he can portal them out, so a big nerf to his utility. Sheep Trick's cooldown has been increased from 9 seconds to 10 seconds, and the impact delay has been increased from 0.8 second to 0.9 second. This one, honestly, the impact delay is quite a big deal because it's already hard enough to hit E on moving targets, and I believe this nerf is probably for cases where, you know, and your enemies are in-capped by perhaps your teammates, and then you just sheep trick onto them for an easy arcane catalyst and all that, especially if you took the right, which gives the arcane catalyst to your E. So a pretty big nerf to his portal, I would say. This is probably the biggest nerf. The EX mouse 2 nerf is also quite a big deal because that's a lot less healing to your team, especially if you're stacked up. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this cast range nerf is justified. Like 10 to 8 seems really drastic. Perhaps just 10 to 9 would have been enough, but I guess this does make the Battlerite, which increases his cast range, a little bit more attractive, a little bit more mandatory in my opinion, if you still want to play Zander effectively, I suppose. Onto his Battlerites. Heart Restoration has been reduced. The healing has been reduced from 6 to 4. Stack Deck no longer grants an extra card for Zander, only for the Illusion, which I think is a pretty big deal because most of the time your Stack Deck, the main damage source comes from Zander, right? Because that's the one that you're more likely going to hit. You're usually aiming from the point of view of your champion rather than Illusion. So this definitely makes Stack Deck a lot worse than it really is. And so it might actually mean that I wouldn't pick Stack Deck anymore because it's harder to sort of get value out of it, basically. And finally, Showdown, shield amount reduced from 14 to 12, which is okay, because I mean, I think they're sort of going with the 12 shield amount for most champions, it seems. And yeah, overall, I think Zander, pretty big nerfs. I'm not sure if he's going to be picked as much anymore. Of course, his utility is still there, you know, his portal is still a really strong ability. There's no doubt about that, but he might need to pick like other Battlerites right now to sort of counteract the nerfs, basically. And yeah, so those were all the changes in this patch, and my thoughts on all of the changes, and my thoughts on all the changes to the champions. For quite a lot of them, I think it's quite fair. Personally, I'm really loving the Alysia buffs. I feel like Zander has been nerfed a little bit too much, just slightly, just a little bit, and Ulric is probably in a little bit more fair spot right now. Jade as well has been put in line, and a little bit of buffs to all the other slightly underperforming champions. And I like the slight shift in direction for Freya as well to a bit more rangy kind of playstyle, which I think is quite okay. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the patch notes. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it's a bit long. I know I haven't posted in a while, but hopefully after this I can work on my Ulric guide, and hopefully should be up by next week, hopefully. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Enjoy the patch. Good luck to all the teams in the Battlerite Pro League, and yeah, I hope you guys have a great day. Keep gaming, stay chill, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright, bye bye.